Hello, I'm Paul Innes, Professor of Shakespeare Studies, and welcome to my channel Shakespeare for All. Today, I'll be talking about Macbeth. This is one of 3 videos on the play dealing with characterisation, plot and context. In this episode, we'll be talking about character. Now, at the end of these videos, I'll offer some study tips on each aspect of the play, together with a list of keywords. Arden 3 quotations is what I'm using. This is the 3rd Arden edition of the play, but any edition with supporting material is fine. So, we're going to talk about Macbeth as the main character, the protagonist of the play. We're also going to talk about the antagonist, which in this case, I'll argue, is the 3 sisters, the witches. And then we'll move on to the supporting cast, the enablers, the ensemble, the group, the other characters. To start with Macbeth as the main character, the protagonist, again we'll be looking at 3 things. 1, early on in the play, his rising ambition as a result of the encounter with the weird sisters. Secondly, when he's thinking about murdering Duncan. And then thirdly, later in the play, when he's on his own, he's lost the witches and Lady Macbeth. He has nothing to do with them, he's at the extreme point. Now, you can use many quotations from this play. So I've chosen just a few because those are the ones that I thought we would use. But if you're studying the play for assessment purposes, there will be many more that you can use, and you'll do that in the classroom. So, protagonist, Macbeth, early in the play. This is from Act 1, Scene 3. This is where Macbeth and Banquo have just met the 3 witches, and they have prophesied he'll become king, and they're meeting some of the other aristocracy. Now, you'll notice from the text, which you can see here, there is an aside. It's a little thing in square brackets. It's put in by editors to indicate a moment where they think that the character is talking directly to the audience, not to the other characters on stage. This promotes dramatic irony, and what it does is it means that the characters who are on the stage, by convention, don't hear what the main character is saying, or the speaking character is saying, to members of the audience. 2 truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. Seems straightforward, however, look at the language. First of all, they're truths. He's already taken it as self-evident truth. They're happy prologues, so it's a good truth, and it's the imperial theme. Now, imperial is a loaded term because it's not just a king or a kingdom. An empire, an emperor, is someone who rules over other states, other sub-kings, sub-kingdoms, sub-states. So he's already thinking excess. He's already taking things to the extreme. He turns to the other characters and says, "I thank you, gentlemen," and then he continues talking to the audience. "Cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth?" So he's still thinking about it, but he's rationalising. He's already decided really what he wants to do. It might be ill, it might be good, but why is it giving me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? He's already decided it's true. Watch for that. Cannot be good, cannot be ill. It's equivocation. That's important in this play, and there'll be many more examples. So moving on a little towards the end of this passage, "My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not." So what's going on here? First of all, it's not fantasy, it's still fantastical, but he's already talking about murder. Also, watch for that word state. He talks about single state of man, so what's in my mind, what's my state, but also is loaded with political terms, loaded with political associations. State is a political word, refers to the state, the country. What else is going on in this passage? "Shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise." Lots of S's, lots of alliteration. If you're using a passage like this in an assessment, and you're quoting it or referring to it, mention the poetry, mention how it works in practice. And then he says, "Nothing is but what is not." What does that mean? Who knows what that means? Nobody knows what that means. He doesn't know what that means. He's mixing up his mind. He's talking about nothing but what is not. It doesn't make much sense. So his thought processes are slightly odd, and he's already determined, effectively, he's going to commit murder. Moving on, section 2 on the protagonist. Macbeth is back home in Inverness and he's thinking about murdering the king. This is a very famous passage where he starts to think about reasons not to. He's here in double trust. First as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed, then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. So what he's doing is he's giving you some background exposition via the speech. Shakespeare's very good at this kind of thing. He's a kinsman. He's related to the king. He's also a subject. The king's his boss. And he's his host. These are 3 very good reasons why, basically, he shouldn't be killing the guy. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued, against the deep damnation of his taking off. Now, if you're studying this as part of a curriculum, studying it for exam purposes or essays, the thing that you're always asked to do is strands of imagery. This is a standard technique. With Duncan, watch for this, we will come back to this later, with Duncan, he isn't just royal, he isn't a great warrior, he's not of high social status, he's always described in religious terminology. Watch for this. Meek, the meek shall inherit the earth. Virtues pleading like angels, trumpet-tongued, deep damnation of his taking off. So Duncan's reign is defined in terms not of military prowess, not in terms of great deeds or anything like that, not in terms of being a great royal, it's purely in terms of his holiness. It's extremely important. Now, watch what happens at the end of this particular speech. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Now, this is a standard quotation with Macbeth, but look at the language. First of all, it's equestrian. It's to do with horse riding. Spur, prick the sides, vaulting, o'erleaps, falls on the other. Basically saying, got to fall on the other side. Now, the horse is a loaded symbol in this period because it's an expensive thing, especially if it's a war horse or a racing horse, and Macbeth's a member of the upper classes, very upper class, so it's military. Also, in terms of the delivery of the poetry, spur to prick the sides of my intent, almost moving in a kind of standard iambic. So watch for that. When you talk about these things, mention them in an essay. So we'll move on to the third section, which we want to talk about, third passage, when he's all alone towards the end of the play. The English are coming, there are Scots rebels, and he's just been told his wife's dead, off stage. She should have died hereafter, he says. He's so extreme now, he's way beyond even caring. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Bit of alliteration and a bit of repetition. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, rule of threes, rhetoric. Now, what's happened here is he's so far to the extreme, he's now on his own, that he's just simply saying, events must take their course. And this is obviously, you'll have heard this passage before, it's a very famous quotation, so you can use that. Then what he says, and this is very famous as well, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The theatre is a metaphor. This is important and this is worth mentioning because in Renaissance drama, especially tragedy, there's always a moment, you can see it coming, it's a convention where someone steps out of the action and says, nobody would believe this if it happened in a play. This is standard procedure. The metaphor of the theatre is being used. Also, the delivery of the poetry, a poor player, alliteration, struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. Bit more alliteration. Also, complete monosyllables. And that line that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, I'm repeating this so that you can hear it, is a perfect iambic line. Very unusual in English blank verse. So it stands out. You hear the rhythm. Use that in an assessment if you've got to write one. So now we're going to talk about the opposition, the antagonists, the weird sisters, the witches. And again, we'll look at 3 sections. The start of the play, when they meet Macbeth and Banquo and speak the first prophecy, and then when they speak the second prophecy. So, at the start of the play, what we have is Scene 1, a desert place. Thunder and lightning enter 3 witches. The witches begin the play, not Macbeth, the witches. So they set things up. That's so important. And there's a conversation, very short conversation, between the first and second witch before the third one joins in. This is done like a ritual, like a blasphemous ritual. Almost like a strange religion. First witch: when shall we 3 meet again in thunder, lightning or in rain? Second witch: when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. Rhyming, moving syllables. It's not iambic pentameter, so they have their own little poetry, their own little language. Right? The witches are unique, and the way that they operate all the way through is by ritual, and there are 3 of them. The Norns, the Fates, whatever you want to call them. That will be ere the set of sun, where the place, upon the heath, there to meet with Macbeth. Now, I've deliberately overemphasised that because the chances are that Heath and Macbeth in the period were pronounced identically. So there's assonance. There are little hidden moments like that in quite a few Shakespeare plays, actually. So what then happens is they come out with their famous utterance. Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air, and then they leave. So it's assigned to the audience because you've got a rhyming couplet, but you've also got the main themes is not quite the right word, a very, very crucial moment, a crucial strand, which happens all the way through the language in this play, which you have the yoking together of opposites. How can fair be foul? How can foul be fair? That's so important, and we've already seen that with Macbeth's own equivocations. That logic is central to the play, and it's the witches who start it off. They set it up. Now, moving on to the first prophecy, what we have is a ritual, actually. Again, the 3 witches talk to Macbeth, and then they talk to Banquo. Witch number 1 says, this is in the past. Witch number 2 says, this is in the present. Number 3 says, this is in the future. So it's a ritual progression. They also repeat things, and it's the rule of 3s. Again, rhetoric. First witch: all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter. So they're using the ritualistic repetition, and it builds towards a climax. Turn to Banquo. Lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, yet much happier. Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none. So, all hail Macbeth and Banquo. Same logic as they did with Macbeth, but there's that equivocation, there's that yoking together of opposites, impossible details. What does this mean? How can you be lesser and greater? How can you be happy and not so happy? How can you do these things at the same time? How can you beget kings if you're not one yourself? Now, Banquo is the legendary ancestor of the House of Stuart, the Scots kings. We'll come back to that later. Now what we'll look at is the second prophecy, second set of prophecies, and I want you to keep in mind the context of the Jacobean stage. This play is produced very early in the reign of James I of Great Britain, who was James VI of Scotland, who had a thing about witches and who's descended from Banquo. So the first apparition says, Macbeth, 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 beware Macduff, beware the Thane of Fife, dismiss me, enough. So you got a rhyme, but also it's almost invoking Macbeth. It repeats his name 3 times. Second apparition, be bloody, bold and resolute, there's your alliteration. Laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of women born, there's your rhyme, shall harm Macbeth. Third apparition, be lion mettled, proud, and take no care who chafes, who frets, or where conspirers are. Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam wood to high Dunsinane hill shall come against him. So you've got the rhymes, and you've now got the 3 elements of the prophecy that Macbeth is going to misinterpret, or rather is going to interpret wrongly, because there are 2 possibilities. Then what you get is Macbeth saying, I want more, and the witches saying, no, 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 you've seen too much. No more, no more. No more's a phrase in Macbeth, by the way. Anyway, what happens here? Macbeth orders them to show him more. Macbeth wants to know more, and this is his undoing. Because what happens is you get a show of 8 kings, the last with a glass in his hand, goes to Banquo following. Now, critics in most introductions will tell you that there is a theory that there was a command performance and that some of this scene was rewritten because the King, James VI of Scotland, first of Scotland and England, descendant of Banquo, is in the audience. So one of the kings in this dumb show has a glass in his hand, a mirror, and he holds it up to the king so that the line stretches from Banquo through to the king sitting in the audience. It's a very, very sophisticated compliment. Now we'll move on to the other characters. The obvious one that we have to look at to begin with, of course, is Lady Macbeth. There are plenty of quotations you can use to support writing on Lady Macbeth. It's the same with Macbeth. I've just chosen one example, short example, from just before her husband returns to Inverness. He's written to her and she knows the king is on his way. Now, she functions obviously as pushing his ambition to extremes until, as we noticed earlier, he has his own momentum. She's killed off stage and he doesn't need to deal with the witches either. This is an element, a passage from a soliloquy, and a soliloquy is a long speech, sometimes quite short, but mostly long speeches delivered directly to the audience by a character standing on stage on their own. It's the equivalent of a modern voiceover. It's like an aside, or the logic of the aside taken to extremes. So this is a soliloquy. And what she says, listen to this: "The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements." The raven's a symbol of death. She's already decided, as soon as Duncan gets here, I'm going to kill him. Fatal entrance. And they're my battlements. They're not my husband's or my family's or my dynasty's. They're mine. I'm a powerful woman. "Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, but I don't want to be a woman anymore. I want to be unhuman. I want to be unsexed. To do what I need to do, I have to do something. I have to become something that is not standard femininity. I've got to become something other than a woman. Come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers." There's your alliteration. "Wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief, unwoman me." And notice the reference to sightless, because conventionally in Western European culture, seers, people who see the truth, prophets, poets, are blind. Right? So that's Lady Macbeth in a nutshell. She's very powerful. I wouldn't mess with her. Now, what we'll do next is we'll look at Duncan holding court, because obviously we have to look at King Duncan. This is from Act 1, Scene 4. It's from before the one we've just looked at with Lady Macbeth, and the Thane of Cawdor has been destroyed, the rebellion's been crushed, the invasions have been destroyed. Macbeth and Banquo are on their way back to court, where Duncan's been sitting the whole time, twiddling his thumbs, listening to reports, because he doesn't fight people. What he says is, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. He got it wrong." He's saying, he's admitting, he can't tell what's going on beneath the surface of the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust. This guy needs and relies on others. And then what happens is, in comes Macbeth. Enter Macbeth, Banquo, Ross and Angus. What does he do? He turns to Macbeth and he says, "Oh, worthiest cousin." Now that's a loaded phrase. Seems like a throwaway, but there are really useful linguistic details in here. First of all, Macbeth's his cousin. That means he's related to the royal family. And in the English Renaissance, you don't want to be related to the royal family because they'll try and kill you. Henry VIII. The Wars of the Roses, which are also known as the Cousins' Wars. Okay? And also, Macbeth is worthiest. Now, there are layers, multiple layers hidden in that term. It could mean worthiest in the sense of wealthiest. It could mean worthiest in the sense of nicest and best. It's also worthiest in the sense of social status. You're my worthiest cousin because you are my closest cousin. Now that puts Macbeth very close to the throne. He might not be a member of the immediate royal family in Shakespeare's imagination, but he's the worthiest cousin. He's the cousin of highest status. That's worth remembering. Now, what we're going to look at next isn't a single character, but actually a double act. And this is Macduff and Malcolm in exile in London. And Malcolm has welcomed Macduff and told him, I'm horrible. I will spend money like water. I will have my way with wenches. I will drink and drink and drink to the cloud, till the cows come home, whatever. I'm not a nice guy. I'm like Macbeth. And Macduff freaks out. Malcolm says, does that make me fit to govern? Macduff says, fit to govern? No, not to live. Own nation miserable with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred. So he's talking about Scotland's state. What's going to happen? You've got Macbeth sitting there on a throne, wallowing in blood, and the opposition's this guy? When shalt thou see thy wholesome days again, since that the truest issue of thy throne by his own interdiction stands accursed, and does blaspheme his breed? Thy royal father was a most sainted king, he says to Malcolm. There's that imagery again. We saw this with Duncan. We saw this with Macbeth's definition of Duncan. Duncan's line is holy. And the language here is very specific, is religious language. His own interdiction. Interdiction's the most powerful weapon in the papal arsenal. England was under interdict in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. It basically excommunicates the whole country. Not just one person, the whole lot. It's an extremely powerful weapon. That is a loaded term. So are words like accursed, blaspheme, royal father was a most sainted king. So again, the definition of this line, this lineage, is holiness. Also watch for that word truest. That's a superlative. It implies there are other possibilities which are of less importance, but they're still there. A little bit of a hint that Macbeth does have some sort of claim on the throne. And in Macduff's vision, the problem is it's either the bloody tyrant or the truest issue, who's this really dodgy guy, Malcolm. So Macduff isn't happy about what's going on in Scotland. Malcolm says, actually I was only kidding. I did this to test you. I am yet unknown to woman, never was forsworn, scarcely have coveted what was mine own, at no time broke my faith, would not betray the devil to his fellow, and so on and so forth. He's defining himself in religious terms again. He's almost a monk. He's celibate, unknown to women. He doesn't break his promises. He's not forsworn. He scarcely covets his own stuff, never mind anyone else's. He doesn't break faith. He doesn't deal with it, doesn't deal with the devil, any of that. He's continuing the line of imagery associated with his father. He's religious as well. So, what does this mean in terms of studying the play? What are the things you should be looking for? Firstly, in relation to Macbeth as a protagonist, the main character. Obviously, we've been looking at character development, the movement from important nobleman to tyrant. He's a warrior, he's ambitious, and he's proud. Remember the importance of that term, pride. However, he doesn't do this in a vacuum. He has a specific set of relationships, obviously with the witches, the weird sisters, the three sisters, and his characterisation develops by means of a conflict with them. He doesn't know it's a conflict, it's very subtle, but he does get the prophecies wrong. That's so important. The second thing is his relationships with other members of the cast, and obviously the most important one here is Lady Macbeth, her support for him, at least initially, the way she eggs him on, attacking his manhood and so on, to get him to do the thing that she wants him to do. You can also think about the witches, the antagonists, the three sisters. Remember, they start the play. They're the ones who set everything up. They provide the first set of prophecies when they interrupt the travels of Macbeth and Banquo from the battlefield to the court. They also produce the second set of prophecies that persuades Macbeth that he's invulnerable. Now remember, they're actually reluctant to keep giving him more and more information, but he insists, because of course pride comes before a fall. With the other characters, remember it's a play. If you're writing an assessment on this, mention it's a play. It seems a really stupid, obvious thing to say, but it's a performance, it's a play. And what we're talking about here is character as role, as function. Lady Macbeth's a really good example of that, especially the way she's killed off stage. She supports Macbeth and then she's removed from the action when she's no longer necessary. He's moved to extremes, he doesn't need her, he no longer sees the witches. She's a role, she's a character. Another thing that's important in performance, this seems such a minor point, is the way in which characters change. The double act of Macduff and Malcolm that we've looked at earlier is a very good example. Early on in the play, they're almost non-existent, they don't matter very much. Macduff's on stage a lot of the time, but he doesn't do a great deal. Malcolm is seen once or twice, that's your lot. By the end of the play, they're crucial, they're extremely important characters. Shakespeare's performance culture had no problem with these kinds of changes in characters. Remember that. If you can squeeze that into an essay, hopefully it'll give you more points. Because you're talking about culture, you're talking about performance context. It's a play. Also, like his father before him, Malcolm needs others. Malcolm needs the English invasion force, and he needs Scots rebels like Macduff to do his job for him. So there's no difference ultimately between Malcolm and his dad. Malcolm needs other people, so did Duncan. Duncan got it wrong. So to finish off, we'll look at some of the key words, and again this is all from the point of view of performance. Protagonist, main character. Sometimes there's more than one, Romeo and Juliet, but not in this play. Antagonist is the main opposition to the protagonist. Ensemble is a group of actors, the rest of the cast. The aside, performance point, spoken directly to the audience from within a group on stage. The convention is the other characters don't hear it. Soliloquy, a full speech delivered directly to the audience by a single character on stage on their own. It's like an extreme form of the aside. Remember to talk about the poetry, the blank verse, the rhyming, the alliteration, the assonance, the rhythm of the poetry. And in this play, the central importance of equivocation. You're given balanced opposites, you have to decide which is which or keep them in balance. So whatever you're doing with the play, good luck with your studies, and if you want to know more, please remember to subscribe.